Hi, I'm Ashley from Sunny Made, and we are on week 1 of our Sunny Star quilt. Hello friends, I am so glad you're here, and I'm super excited about this video series because I've been kind of wanting to do this for a while, and it's finally time. My goal of this video series is for you to be able to take a quilt pattern, to read it, and to come up with a finished quilt. And I was originally going to do someone else's quilt pattern, but then I thought, well, why not? I have so many ideas in my head about what I want to do with certain fabric. And so I decided I was just going to go ahead and create a quilt pattern for us to use in this series. And that is where Sunny Stars came from. This is the quilt we're going to be working on. It's a fun, it looks scrappy quilt. And I'm going to walk you through step by step, how I would read the quilt pattern, how I would take the steps to create the blocks, and I am super excited to be going through this with you. I'm going to be dividing this into 4 different weeks. The first week we are just cutting fabric. The second week we're going to create these smaller stars in the middle. The third week we're creating the full quilt block, and the fourth week we're going to put it all together with our piano border there on the end. I just wanted to stop right here and kind of tell you how I go about tackling a quilt project. I like to do it in sections, and so I will do all the cutting, and then I will do a section of the pieces, a block, and I will do all of those, and then I will move on to the next section and I will do all of those. I kind of do like an assembly line style, which is how I have this video series set up. We're going to cut, we're going to make the smaller star, we're going to make the bigger star, and then we're going to put it all together. And you'll see as I move through these videos that how I go about tackling that. So first I will make like the half square triangles on the small quilt. I'll make the 4 patches, and then I will put the small star together. And then I will move on and I will make the 8 at a time half square triangles of the big points, and then I will put them together and create the larger blocks. So first let's talk about supplies. What do you need? First you need to go and get the quilt pattern sent to your inbox. You just stick your email in and you get the Sunny Stars quilt pattern. If you haven't done that yet, I did put a link in the description box below to get that sent to you. Then inside it says what you're going to need. This is only written for one size of quilt, and I made it from a layer cake. I just realized that as I was looking through this that I probably put the materials list in a weird spot, but it is on the last page. So in future, when I actually go to release a pattern, hopefully I think about this a little better and do not put this on the last page. I think in my mind I was thinking, oh, it'll be the back of a pattern, but that is not how this is set up. So sorry about that. On the back page, it says materials. You'll need 1 layer cake or 42 10-inch squares, which is what a layer cake is. 2 yards of background fabric, a half a yard for binding, and 4 yards for backing fabric. I tend to just buy the stuff for the top. I like my binding to match my quilt. So if there is yardage where I get my pre-cuts, I like to go ahead and get my binding at the same time. If you don't want it matchy-matchy, I'm kind of a matchy-matchy person, that's okay too. You can decide on your binding later. So first we want to start with our layer cake. I'm going to be using this Moda layer cake. It is called Bountiful Blooms. It's by Sherry and Chelsea. You probably could still find this. This fabric line came out in the fall, so you might still be able to find this, but I think any layer cake or 10-inch square fabric will be great. So the first thing we want to do is read through our whole pattern. Figure out what we're doing, what it's going to look like, and then we're going to come back and start from the beginning and work through our fabric. If you look at the beginning of the quilt pattern, it actually tells you, read through all the instructions. Okay, I already just told you that, right? It says that everything is going to be at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we're going to sew all seams at a 1/4 inch. Assume that fabric is about 42 inches. Usually fabric on the bolt is between 43 and 44 inches, but then you have your salvage edge. So you cut off the salvage edge on both ends, and you have about 42 inches left. All seams are sewn with fabrics right sides together. I hope that is pretty obvious. And WOF means width of fabric, which is what I talk about with the background fabric. So cutting instructions, first we talk about background fabric. We talk about binding fabric, though you don't really probably need to do your binding yet. And then I talk about cutting instructions for our 10-inch squares. I show a diagram of how to cut your 10-inch squares and how best to divide them up. So let's pull our layer cake out. Got to flip it over so I can undo it. And let's get dividing it up. Just toss those on the floor, right? Somebody can come back and pick them up. Oh wait, that will be me. Okay, first layer cake. We are going to choose 7 low volume 10-inch squares. What does that mean? These are going, low volume is fabric that isn't dark, it isn't in your face. Usually it tends to be white with very light colors on top of it. Oh, I'm already getting fuzzies for my 10-inch squares. Okay, so this is white on white. Definitely a low volume. I'm going to pull those aside. This is a low volume. See how light this is? Pretty much I'm going to pull aside 7 of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these fabrics that aren't too big and bold. We are using them in the points and corners of this center star. So I'm going to do 7 of those. Okay, here are my low volume. Next, I need to choose 12 pattern 10-inch squares that we are going to leave as 10-inch squares. I want you to notice that as I put cutting instructions on here, I actually give you letters in parentheses. What this is going to do is tell us later in the pattern, if I want to say I want to take piece A, I'm going to take piece A and put it with piece D or whatever it is that I'm asking. So once I cut these into smaller pieces, I'm going to set them aside in their letter spot. So we've set aside our low volume ones, and these are going to be cut into A and B. The next thing we're going to do is find 12 10-inch squares out of our layer cake pack, and we are going to just leave them as 10-inch squares. They're actually going to end up being the larger points in our outer stars. In this quilt pattern, I actually took this fabric for the larger points are all the same fabric. They just have, or all the same design on the fabric. They just have a different background color, and it's the main print design. I haven't quite looked at this, so I haven't decided how I want to divide these up, but I will get in there. Then I'm going to choose 12 more pattern squares and subcut them into D, E, and F. And if you look, oh, I already see a problem with this. I said figure A and I put figure 1. So I hope you can figure that out. I show a diagram on how you are going to cut those up to create D, E, and F in with one square. Then you're going to choose 4 more and do figure 2 or figure B as I wrote it in the quilt pattern, and choose 13 more, which gives you the last 13, and those are going to just be for the final edges of the quilt pattern, and they're going to be cut into strips for our final edge. So I do give you layouts on how to trim down each of your 10-inch pieces into the pieces we need for the quilt pattern. Then if you look at the second page, I do background fabric. I'm just going to assume that you got 2 yards. I have bolts, so I'm just going to take it from the bolt of fabric and cut it into smaller pieces. Well, I am glad that I went ahead and started doing this before I actually talked about it, because there's actually a few different errors on this. So I'm hoping that by the time you guys went to get this, that I've corrected this. So not only did I change the figures, because I need to change those to say figure 1, I actually put this in wrong. So the last one where we're using figure 3, you will have 7, whoops, you will only have 7 10-inch squares. Okay, so the last one where it says choose 7 10-inch squares and subcut into F strips, seeing figure 3. So if you happen to get this before I made the corrections, I'm sorry, but I guess this is why we are working through this, because now I can fix it on my way through. So let's reiterate what we're doing. I have 7 low volume squares, 10-inch squares. Okay, we're making A, we're going to subcut these into A and B. Next, I have 12 10-inch squares, and these are going to be for the large squares, or the large points on our bigger stars, and we're just going to leave these the way that they are. Next, I have 12 10-inch squares that we're going to follow figure 1 in and subcut them into D, E, and F pieces. We have 4 10-inch squares that we are going to follow figure 2 and subcut them into G and F pieces. And then last is 7 10-inch squares, and we're going to follow figure 3 and cut them into F pieces. Okay, now that we have all of our fabric divided, it's time to start cutting. So on our first one, it says choose 7 low volume 10-inch squares and subcut. We're going to take 3 of them and turn them into 2.5-inch squares, and we're going to take 4 of them and turn them into 36 3-inch squares. So let's get our fabric together, decide which one is which. And the first one is, there's 3 of them. So I'm going to take 3. Okay, and we have our 3 that we're going to subcut into 2-inch squares. And so we're just going to take our ruler. Let me get this going the right direction. I'm going to line this up. We're going to hit them at 2.5-inch intervals. And then we're going to turn it and we're going to do the same thing this way. Okay, and now we have all of our 2.5-inch squares. Now, just a side note, if you don't have enough low volume pieces, to have 7 of them, because we definitely want it to feel like there's a low volume, high volume. Then you can just use background fabric. Just cut squares, 10-inch squares out of your background fabric, and you can use that in place of your 10-inch low volume squares. I know sometimes fabric lines don't come with 10-inch squares or low volume. They're all just lots of bright colors. And so you can just make it from the background fabric. In fact, on that other one on the wall, I did make some from my background fabric. Okay, so we're going to take this and we're going to subcut it into 3-inch squares. Okay, and there we have our 36 3-inch squares. And of course, I have one that didn't quite go all the way through. Next on ours, these are 10-inch squares, and we're going to leave them just as they are. So I'm just going to set those to the side. And the next 12 10-inch squares, we're going to cut them like this one here. We're going to cut a row of 3, a row of 2.5, and then a row of 4.5. I like to cut 3 or 4 at a time. I don't like to do many more than that. You can cut 3 at a time if you'd like, if that's easier. So I'm just going to line up my edges. Okay, so look at this diagram again. I'm going to do a 3-inch strip, a 2.5-inch strip, and a 4.5-inch strip. So first I'm going to do my 3-inch strip. Pull that aside. I'm going to do 2.5 inches. And then this one is automatically 4.5 inches. And then if you look, my 2.5-inch strip and my 4.5-inch strip are subcut into 2.5 inches. So I'm just going to scoot around here, line up my ruler with this cut line and with the edge, and start subcutting. Oh, I can't see my line. Start subcutting these ones. So here I have, these are going to be our 2.5-inch squares are going to be letter E. Our 4.5-inch strips are going to be letter F. And then back to our 3-inch strip, we're going to subcut these into 3-inch squares. Okay, so these are letter D. So here I have D, E, F, and in my low volumes I have A and B. And we're going to just continue doing that with the rest of these. These are the ones for figure 1. Okay, I'm just going to do one set for each of you so you can see how I did it. This is figure 2, my 4. Okay, let's look at figure 2 Again, we're going to do a 3.5 inch strip. We're going to do a 3-inch strip, a 2.5 inch strip, and a 4.5 inch strip. Move those to the side. Okay, so here's my 3-inch. And I'm going to put those to side so I can do those here in a minute. This one's going to be 2.5 inches and 4.5 inches. Now these two are going to be cut differently. This one is 4.5 inch strips. So I'm going to do here and here. And these are going to go into my F pile. This one is going to go into, I'm going to cut these into 2.5 by 4.5 inch strips. Make sure I get that lined up nicely. Okay, those are also letter F. And then back to my 3-inch strip, we're going to do 3-inch squares, which is letter G. Actually, that is another one that I just realized I messed up. So these are going to be letter D. Okay, D, E, F, our piles are getting bigger. Let's put our smaller pieces to the side. Okay, last, we have 7 of these. So I'll grab a few, line them up. We are doing figure 3. We're doing a 4.5 inch strip and a 4.5 inch strip. And then we're subcutting these into 2.5 inches. And then we'll do those to the other 4 in this pile. Now that we're done cutting our 10-inch squares, it is time to cut our background fabric. I buy my background fabric from Joann's on the bolt. I can usually get a pretty good discount on them, so I actually like to buy it that way. I just find it's a little more cost effective and it works for me. So we need our pattern. We need our, I believe it's 2 yards of background fabric, and we need a really long ruler, and of course a rotary cutter with a nice sharp blade. On page 2 of this, after the front page, you have before you begin, and then you have cutting instructions. Okay, first I'd like to point out that it's like cut 1 strip 3 inches by width of fabric, cut 3 strips 10 inches by width of fabric, cut 3 strips 4.5 inches by width of fabric, and then cut 6 strips by 2.5 widths of fabric. And then it goes into detail of how you're going to subcut each of those strips. So what I like to do is I like to cut all the strips first, just because it's easier and I have my fabric all laid out and ready to go, and then I'll come back and subcut them. So first off is a strip, 1 strip, 3 inches by width of fabric. Width of fabric is, let me open this up a little bit more. The width of fabric is from salvage edge to salvage edge. So here I have it on the bolt. There's a fold on one end. It's roughly 44 inches from one salvage edge to the other. And so what it's saying is you need to have one of these cut in a 3-inch strip. So I'm just going to first make sure that the edge of my fabric is straight. And then I'm going to bring my ruler and line it up right there along the edge and my 3-inch line. This is where you can see if your fabric is straight. If your fabric is not straight, start by trimming it off so that it is nice and straight. And then I'm just going to cut my 3-inch strip. Next, it calls for 3 strips that are 10 inches. Now my ruler is not 10 inches. It is only 6.5 inches. So let me give you a little trick on this. I want it 10 inches. I'm going to line this up with the 10-inch line on my cutting mat. Then I go 10 plus 10, right? So I start here with 10 inches. I want it 10 inches wide. It's going to go to my 20-inch line on my cutting board, and I'm going to line that line up right along the edge at the top and the bottom. Let me zoom out so you can see this a little better. There we go. Okay, I have a little tiny 20 here and a little tiny 20 here. So I'm lining my ruler up with the 20 and the 20 after I've lined this part up on the 10. And that is going to give me a perfect 10-inch strip. But I need 3 of these. So I'm going to do that 3 times. As you can see, I'm at the end of my bolt and it's getting kind of wrinkly and stuff. I'm going to take this over to my iron and get it ironed so that it's nice and smooth. Okay. My tip for that actually is if your fabric is very wrinkly, it is going to be hard to cut the pieces you need for your quilt. The wrinkles are going to get in the way. They're going to bunch up. You're going to end up with pieces that aren't quite the right size. They're either going to have some weird puckers in them, or you're going to end up with pieces that are too small because they're not lining up correctly. So if you need to, always take your fabric to the iron and get it ironed up. Okay, so next we need 3 strips of 4.5 inches and 6 strips of 2.5 inches. It doesn't look like I'm going to have quite enough here, but let's see how far we can get. So I'm going to line up my fabric. Oh, see? And if you notice, my edging here got a little off when I ironed it. So I'm going to turn this around because it's easier for me to cut on my right side. I'm going to line up my ruler, a line on my ruler with the fold edge up here. And what that does is just gives me a nice straight edge, gives me a place to start and line up my fabric. Okay, started that, and as you can see, it does get slightly off. I'm going to give it a little trim and pull those pieces aside. Okay, it actually works out because my 2.5-inch strips on here are for the border, so I won't need those for a little bit. So I want to make sure that I get the 3 4.5-inch strips and get them subcut so that I can go ahead and get started on my quilt. So I'm going to line up this edge right along the 4.5 inches and then cut 1, scoot that one over a little bit so I can see where my cut line is. Line it up again. And line it up one more time. Okay, and I only have almost 3 inches. So I can actually use that with my next one when I'm there. First, we're going to start with our 3-inch width of fabric. We need 12 3-inch squares. So you have 12 total, and these are going to be letter B. Now what this is going to do is it's going to give me, so I have letter B from when I subcut those 10-inch squares from my layer cake. And these are just going to add to that background to letter B so that we will have enough to make those inner squares. So I like to fold it over. I can do 4 layers at a time. That's what I feel comfortable with. So I fold it over so this folded edge is right at the edge of my selvage because I'm going to trim off that selvage anyways. So there I trim off the fold and my selvage. And then I'm gonna I need 12 of these. So I need to make 3 cuts. So I have 1, 2, and 3. And here is my leftover. So these are letter B. Next, we're going to take our 10-inch strips, and because I don't have a 10-inch ruler, we are going to line them up on my cutting mat again. I need to first trim off my selvage edge. So I'm going to just put 2 strips on top of each other because I feel comfortable with cutting 4 layers at a time. And then I'm going to line up a line on the edge of the fabric, and I'm going to cut off that selvage edge. Once again, I'm going to line up my fabric on that 10-inch line on my cutting mat. Move my paper so I can see where my next number is. Here is 20. And I'm going to just line 20 and 20 and trim right here. And this one, I'm not going to actually move. I need to move my ruler though. It brings me over to 30. So I lined it up on the 10. I'm going to cut on the 20 and then on the 30, and that will give me 10-inch squares. Here's my leftover. So here I have 8 10-inch squares, and then I just need to get 4 more from this set. So here I'm going to double it like I did on that first one, trim it off, and then let's see, I can do it on the 5. I did it on the 15, and then I'm going to trim it to the 25. Okay, we have our 12 10-inch squares. These are letter H. And last, we have 3 strips of 4.5 inches. And we are going to subcut these into 4.5-inch squares. So I'm going to start by lining these up and trimming off my selvage. For another way to trim it off, if I line it up here on this line and go, okay, this is all my selvage on this side, then I can actually trim it this direction instead of having to flip it around afterwards. So these are 4.5-inch squares.
I need 16 of them. Oh, I need 16 from each strip. Okay. I'm like, what is it doing?
I actually just found another mistake. I need 48 squares total. And in 2 strips, I get 16, which means instead of 3 strips of 4.5 inches, I actually need 6 strips of 4.5 inches so that I end up with 48 squares total. That also might mean that we need an extra 2.5. We need actually 2.5 yards of background fabric. So, okay. So we need to cut 3 more strips, which I don't have more fabric. So I will get those cut before next week. That way I have a total of 48-inch squares. Now the other strips that I didn't cut yet are the 2.5-inch strips. If you want to save those until after we get the whole top together, that is fine too. You can cut those strips after we've gotten the stars together and the stars are all sewn together. This is just one of the borders on the quilt. Okay, now that we're done cutting, we have all of our pieces in front of us. So our low volumes are A and B, and then from our 10-inch squares we have C, D, D, E, F. We have our 10-inch squares set aside for our 8 at a time half square triangles, which we're going to do in video 3. And then we have our background squares. If you have any questions at this point, make sure you ask them. I want to make sure that you understand the big picture, see where we're going and see where we're going to end up. Until time, it's time to show you what I've been working on. I've been trying this month to finish up any of my quilts that I have already started. And this was on my list of already started. It's almost finished, but not quite. And so I sewed strips on it. These strips right here, the final all the way around, and I just need a 4.5-inch border with background fabric on it. But I wanted to show you, this is absolutely gorgeous. This is called Mango. It is by Modern Welsh Quilts. I love her patterns. The only place you can really find them is either on her website or through her Facebook group. She has a great Facebook group, so go check her out. And that is my finished top. I did it with ombres. V & Company, I believe, do these ombres, the confetti ombres, and I just love how it turned out. So make sure you ask your questions. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next week. Happy sewing!